Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Today I speak with Mattijs Welle. He's the CEO of Mews Systems, which is a leading brand of hospitality software to help hotels manage their operations. Mattijs started a business with nothing, and just a few years later, his company became 21st in the Financial Times list of the top 1,000 fast-growing companies in Europe. So in this episode, we dive into that story. How did he start? What were the highs and lows of the journey? How did he deal with the COVID pandemic, which obviously hit hospitality and hotels incredibly hard? What were the shifts he had to make? And how has he returned the company to growth so fast? This is a really interesting conversation. We discover some key insights around people he should have hired before, things he would do differently next time, the benefits of bringing systems together to create a more holistic view on the business, and many other things. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Mattijs Welle. Hi, Matt, and welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, it's good to see you today, and thank you for joining me. I do love. Is it fish behind you on the background? I think that's.
It is. This is pre-pandemic. I thought, it's cute if I do like a fish wallpaper behind me, because once every so often I'll take a conference call from my living room or from my office at home, and here I am trapped in this office for like 365 days a year later, and I think the whole team hates it now.
Oh, so that's a good reason for anyone who's listening on the podcast to go and check out the video, because it's it's like we're in a fish bowl, which is perfect. So Matt, it's great to have you here. I found out about you and about Muse, because I think you're number one on the Financial Times list of Europe's fast-growing companies. Now, I know that was pre-COVID, and you're in the hospitality sector, so I know that's been a whole journey. But we were just talking before we started the show, and after a difficult year, you're also back onto an exciting path. So I think it'd be great today just to explore that and understand. How have you managed to scale the company? I think you got up to over 400 people very fast, and again, you're back onto a new growth trajectory. But before we do all that, why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your background, and I guess the question I've got is, I know you had this cushy corporate job at Hilton, probably on the fast track, and you left it all to do your own thing. So just as you dive in, I'd love to hear about, what was the fire in your belly that made you, change course?
So I'm Dutch originally, and like Dutch people do, we get in the caravan in the summer, and in the winter we go to Austria. And when I first stepped into a hotel at the age of 4, I honestly knew from that moment that I was going to work in hotels for the rest of my life. I just loved it. I thought, wow, just the atmosphere of serving people and just like great food all around. And it's traveling is just such a fun experience. And I just got really passionate about it. And then everything in my life went towards working there. So at 16, I started working in restaurants. Then I joined the hotel school in The Hague. I finished hotel school, and then a lot of these big chains, they have their graduate programs, and I ended up picking Hilton, and I did a fast track with Hilton, moved to London, moved to South Africa, and then ended up in Prague about 15 years ago now, and it's been a ride. It's a great company to work for. They've been super supportive to my growth. Like almost every year they would promote me, because I tend to get bored. I am like, great, I can do this job. What What's else next? Do you have for me?
Yeah.
And they were really good until, you've reached the peak of growth. Once you go into sales director, regional sales director, and my next step would probably have been vice president of sales in some way, but it's the same job. It's just more responsibilities, but basically you're doing the same thing. And I really struggled with having an opinion about, I had insights on marketing. I'm like, can I have a conversation about marketing? And they're like, no. you're the salesperson, so you stick to the sales swim lane, and marketing does marketing. And that was my biggest struggle, I think, after 10 years almost with Hilton. And that's when I joined Muse.
Just to say that reminds me, when I was in consulting, I became a partner in a consulting company, and I think I found the same thing after about a year there. I was like, actually, this is just the same thing now, right? Yeah. Time for a change. And so that was
like, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? So like,
it's just a game you want to play. It's just a game you want to play.
A lot of people love the predictability, and I hated it. And I was like, I know this, and I know what's going to happen, and I don't want to know what's going to happen, because I as a person won't grow from it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think, and I think that often, I think there's a trend there, right? When I have these conversations, I think that hunger for growth and for novelty is a key driver, right, of a lot of successful leaders. It's obviously, especially the entrepreneurial ones, but I think a lot of leaders who really especially get all the way to CEO of whatever company. I think there is a hunger for the novelty, right? Because it's easy to otherwise to find a comfortable spot somewhere else and just stay there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, so tell us about Muse. What's that all about?
So, having worked in hotels for most of my working life until Muse, I felt the pain of technology. And when I met Richard, the founder of Muse, he was building a hotel in Prague, and he was like, I'm building this great, like really forward-thinking hotel, and I'm not buying a reception desk. I hate the reception desk. I think it's this beacon of bad hospitality where there's a person typing in data behind the desk and you queue up to it. And he just never purchased a desk. And like, we became friends over the years leading up to the opening of that hotel. And I was like, so what are you doing system-wise? Because there is no system that is completely mobile in the cloud, that you can run on a tablet. And in the end, he ended up asking the owner of the hotel for 50K, saying, if you give me 50K, I'll build it, because Oracle wanted 50K to get access to their API. I'm like, no, that's crazy. We can totally build this. And like, we're young kids, right? We're 30, and we're like, we can totally build an enterprise solution for hotels, which does pretty much everything in a hotel, from housekeeping to front desk to reporting to finance. But sometimes that ignorance is a good thing. So we jumped like into this challenge, and it was April 2013 when I joined, and we're like, okay, let's start building this PMS, property management system. So we had developers, and they were just like drawing out these giant like flow charts of how the architecture should be. And we got to like August, I think, of that year, and I was like, okay, the hotel's opening in next month. Are you going to code anything? Like, we need some system. And they pulled it off. So it went live. It was terrible. Like it was crashing. It didn't work. The accounting was completely wrong. But we just kept working at it. And, at some point, after a year of the accountant screaming and shouting at us, we thought like she was wrong. We're like, she's clearly wrong. Like, this is what she says does not make sense. Then we read the accounting book and we're like, okay, actually she was right and we were wrong, and we need to rewire the system, which we did. So the first years were really hard. And then, at some point we figured out how to get funding. We switched the company from a Czech company to a Dutch company to get access to faster fundraising. And that really is when everything changed. Once we got our first funding after about 3 years, and it all started to accelerate.
Yeah. So I guess if we're looking at this journey of scaling, what were those major phases, right? So obviously you just, I guess, told us the first one was the kind of the seed idea. Yeah. This hotel that needed its own kind of desk-free system. You kind of had this 3 years of experimenting, and then you got your first finance round. And that was back in, so that was, I guess, 2016 thereabouts.
16, yeah, correct.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah, so up to 2016, we had another angel investor join. And whenever we are in trouble, and we were in trouble almost every month when we had to do payroll, we were like, oh, Ori, could you help us out again? And at some point he's like, okay, guys, you really have to get your shit together.
Yeah.
And those first 3 years were really hard. Like, we literally sometimes had not paid the guys for 2-3 months. And you can only make up so many excuses for it. But actually they were super supportive to the business and the vision that we had.
So let me just slow you down on that one. Why was that? Like, how come you had people who are willing to keep going even when they hadn't received a paycheck for a couple of months? Like, how did you do that?
So the early developers, they came right out of school, and I think when we were like, build this, like, people are going to buy it, and they're like super skeptical, right? In the beginning, they're like, why would anyone want a system that does this? Like, that doesn't make any sense. we built it, and then they started seeing the traction that we got in the Czech Republic. We got our first 10 customers, and like, oh wow, people are actually using this and are very passionate about it. And I think it was the passion of the customers when they were, we would pull them into customer meetings because we didn't have anyone else to represent that we had a company, and just seeing the passion from customers about our solution and the hatred against the incumbents in the industry, and like this, how bad the service was. I think they really saw, oh, there is actually something special here, and they bought into it. And we did have a lot of fun, besides having to do the payroll at the end of the month, which was a terrifying moment. We actually had a fantastic time with the early team.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, right? Bringing the developers in to see the customers, because a lot of companies, they no longer do that, right? Or they find it hard to do that. And yet,
like
that was a key motivator.
Like at some point, I think the night's receptionist got hold of the telephone number of our lead developer. And for years, she would call him in the middle of the night, and he was so unhappy that he'd ever done that. And that was probably his biggest lesson: never give your phone number away.
Yeah, right. Yeah, especially if yes, not every customer understands time zones either, do they? So that doesn't always help. So then, obviously, you got your first funding, and I guess at that point, your growth started to kind of really kick off.
Yeah, like in 2016, we had tried fundraising in Czech Republic, and the climate just wasn't right here. And if you go to Western Europe at that time, and you say we're a Czech company, there was this, like we don't really understand the Czech, and it was a European country, right? But there was this immediate I'm not sure about that. And then we decided, well, I'm Dutch, let's pretend we're a Dutch company. And then we started going around the Dutch funds, and most of them said, but you have to be a Dutch company. Like, that's fine, we'll just move the IP across. And once getting the IP across was a 6-month project with our lawyers, and it was very painful to figure out the transfer pricing. But once we're a Dutch company, suddenly all doors opened, and it was much, much easier. And even for US investors later on, moving the company to a Dutch entity made a lot of sense. And especially now with Brexit, there's obviously a lot of focus on the Dutch market as well. So they're really benefiting from this. So our first funding came from a fund there. And then we started building a sales team and a marketing team. And like the core things you do in a business. And up until that point, me and Richard, we were everything. We were support and sales and product management. We didn't even know product management existed at that point. We were just designing products without the knowledge of how you'd build that organization. And then at that point, it really started to professionalize. But the real pivotal moment was when we had our Series A, and we brought in Notion Capital in London, who are a SaaS specialist fund. So they only focus on SaaS, A and B series kind of. So you really are in this environment of really cool startups. They bring them all together and have great sessions. And I think that really accelerated the leveling up in our organization as well.
And what were the insights that you had around that time, which really helped you scale, right? Which really took away some of those barriers to growth?
Like, I think there was one big one. I remember being in this session. This is a woman that Notion brought in, Melissa Di Donata, who came from SAP, and she is, within 3 seconds she could figure you out. And I remember her looking around our leadership, like me, Richard, and Greg, our chief commercial officer, and she's like, "Where's your head of sales?" And within like 5 seconds, she'd figured out that we had underinvested in our sales organization. And she's like, if you do anything and you walk out of this room, go and find a head of sales, because somebody needs to go talk to these customers. And it can't be the chief commercial officer, because he needs to build a strategy. And that was a really powerful moment for us, I think.
So that was what was happening, was that your chief commercial officer was doing that as well as other things? He was
like mostly sales at that point. Like marketing, we had totally underinvested on. So only last year, January, we hired a chief marketing officer. And that was really the first time we made a real investment, and that we actually separated it out from commercial. And we said marketing actually needs to be its own entity in the leadership team and own representation. And we brought in a heavy hitting chief marketing officer. And oh my God, like, I regret that we haven't invested in marketing in all these years, because once you get that machine working, it is incredibly powerful. And, we thought we'll just write a few blogs and have some basic website that will do the job. But actually, branding is so much more than just a new logo. And we just didn't know. And I think that is a very welcome investment we made.
It's interesting. One of the little rules of thumb I give people when I'm talking about organizational design is, you should never put long-term organizations under the remit of short-term organizations, right? So in other words, if marketing is underneath sales, marketing becomes basically sales enablement, sales support.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's need for that, right? There's a need for some of
Yeah.
those things, but it becomes very tactical because at the end of the day, sales is responsible for short-term, quarterly numbers, right? Where you move marketing out as its own organization, it's then able to think about, sure, some of the short-term stuff, but also long-term brand development, marketing strategy, positioning, the more strategic things, right? And it happens in all sorts of places, right? Where you have these kind of long-term, remits. And if they're inside something which has a short-term remit, it becomes, it's very, very hard.
And we're in a digital business, right? So like digital marketing is so critical to get right. And we just didn't know, like it's the unknown. We're like, we have a website and we do some ad spending on it. Yeah, sure. We didn't have someone check it. And actually now you look at it and in hindsight, you're like, shit, like how did we get this so wrong all these years?
These conversations are all about scaling yourself to scale your business. And one of the biggest barriers that stops us from doing that is getting stuck in operations and not spending time on the most valuable strategic work. So I do recommend that you take our free executive productivity assessment. It's just 10 quick questions to find out exactly where you are on the journey to executive time management mastery. You'll then discover how you can free yourself up for more strategic activity. To take the assessment, head to xquadrant.com/go/productivity assessment with a hyphen between those two last words. Now, back to the conversation. And what kind of things were you what kind of things are you doing differently now then as a result of having that CMO in the business?
Like I think it's really the solution-based selling that we were selling feature, and that was all we did. And suddenly, our chief marketing officer was like, let's step back and let's see what the bigger story is. And we interviewed our customers and listened to how they talk about us, so that we could use that language back to other customers, because we were using our own words and we'd hoped that they would adopt them. But they didn't. Like they were talking about our system in their own words, and just sometimes actually just doing 20 customer interviews and recording it and making the whole company listen to it to build these buying personas. That was a very welcome step that we'd never done.
Yeah, love it. Great. So, so that's one of the key things, obviously, that you did really was in terms of on the sales side, right? Getting a sales officer, getting a marketing officer, as well as commercial. Is there something else that you're looking back on, on the last few years, you think? It might be, that we've talked there about the demand side, right? Generating demand, obviously. What about in terms of the organization's ability to respond to that demand, right? Obviously, growth can be difficult when you're growing at that at that level.
Yeah, and we ended up throwing a lot of people at problems as we were scaling up. We scaled up in 2019 from about 200 people to 450 in a really short time span. And as the demand started growing, we're like, we need to implement these hotels. So we're like, oh crap, let's just one person we were going on site to a hotel to train them, to get the hotel live. So one person could maximum per month do about 3 hotels, because that doesn't scale. They have to travel everywhere. And one of the things that COVID has really taught us is actually doing everything digitally. Suddenly one person can do 6 hotels because they don't have to travel. They can multitask. We can do combined sessions. So actually COVID was an accelerator of our own innovation in the back office. But in 2019, we literally had all this demand come in, and we just kept throwing more junior people out who were able to train these hotels to go live faster and faster. And in hindsight, it wasn't the smartest thing. Had COVID not happened, we probably would have learned some lessons, but definitely not as aggressive as the stance that we've taken now, where we say everything is remote and online, and we're never going back on site because it doesn't make sense. We can do better training online than we can do on site.
Yeah, I can see that, right? Because you can standardize, you can...
You have specialists on different topics of the training, right? So if you have one person come on site, they have to do the whole training for accounting, for front office, for revenue management. But actually, when you do that remotely, you can have different specialists cover different topics, and actually the hotel gets a much better experience in the end.
Yeah, lovely, yeah. And so then I know, of course. So let me ask about pain. So that was one of the pains. I guess you had so many people, but in a sense, at least it was kind of working and you were growing. Were there things which you felt really held you back, and because obviously you had I'm just imagining going from doubling the size of your company in a year or whatever it was, must have created a whole load of issues around, I don't know, just people, right? And onboarding and management. And I mean, how did that work?
And it really comes around leveling up the talent in the org at the higher levels. You know, most of the team up to 2019 was the early startup team that was in the leadership functions. And we, you know, a lot of us were able to scale up, but sometimes you don't, right? Some people don't necessarily scale up to that level at the speed that come, and the organization is changing so incredibly fast. It's almost a different company every year that you go through this cycle. And we've started bringing in outside talent. So our chief people officer, our chief marketing officer, we've just hired a chief customer officer coming in from San Francisco. And it's really finding that balance between the founding team, which is still very, very critical to the organization, but also then having a senior team that have been in organizations that have scaled up beyond any of the sizes that we're going to aim for in the next 2-3 years, to really bring a different perspective in the room. And we're doing that now. We've just introduced an extended leadership team, because we're really leveling up the next level in the organization, so that you really have not just the 8 people at the top that have all the talent and then a very junior team around them. We really wanted to build a much more layered organization in terms of talent and experience.
Yeah, I think it's important because I see it as like it's what do you call it? It's the muscle structure, right, of a body, you know, so the nervous system, if you like, right? So you need to be able to have this kind of hierarchy throughout an organization, not hierarchy, but this muscle structure, so that when you want the body to move, the organism to move, you know, you can actually do it. Otherwise, you've got to cut this little tiny, it's like an amoeba, right? You've got a central CEO, founder, or small team, and then you've got this wobbly exterior. And how do you actually get the organism to move when you need it to move? And you can't do that just with a tiny leadership team and then an amorphous mass. You need to kind of build some sinews in the body. You need to kind of have an extended team who's also going to be able to represent the management.
Exactly. And without just building in that structure of layer upon layer upon layer, you know, we really do fight the bureaucracy, and it's hard because as you scale, bureaucracy doubles in size beyond anything. And it is a constant fight against it. And like, if I hear someone's like, oh, let's create an Excel sheet and keep a manual track of it, I'm like, no. Let's get our business operations team to figure out a way to automate that. And that is a constant thing we're fighting, like not having Excel sheets or Word documents with shared access where people are updating things manually. And it is hard. Not everything can be automated, but a lot of things beyond what I could ever imagine can be automated.
Yeah. That's a great, it's a great point. It's something I look at even in my own business, which obviously a very different scale, because when you get something automated and streamlined, it's just an asset that you've built and it's done. Whereas if it's, as you said, it's ad hoc process.
Like, and it's why, you know, we were using all kinds of back office systems, right? We were on Pipedrive for sales, we had HubSpot for marketing, for operations we used Intercom, we use Sales Machine, all these disjointed systems. And with Zapier, you can kind of hack your way together. But actually, we've now decided to go all Salesforce. So we are ripping out everything and we're moving everything to Salesforce. And we're in the middle of the process. We've just moved sales a few months ago, operations last week. We're now moving our support also onto Salesforce. We've interconnected it with HubSpot, and suddenly we have reporting of the whole journey of the customer. And it's something that I've been dreaming of for years. And you know, in the early days, you don't go for the most expensive solution. You go for whatever is the problem. Let's throw a system at that, and then you build this really complex infrastructure. But actually streamlining it all, and you just feeling the team have a sigh of breath of relief, because suddenly they have access to all of it in one system. They don't need to log into 15 different systems to get access to the information. It's been very interesting to see how accepting the team has been of these migrations of solutions to one bigger solution.
Yeah, that's it's a great point, right? As you go, you often just solve the problems as they come.
Yeah. And it gets messier as it goes on.
It doesn't feel like it at the time. You feel you found a really cool tool for a really pressing problem, right? Yes, fantastic. And so, perhaps tell us a bit about the last year, because obviously COVID hit. You're in hospitality.
Yeah, wasn't great.
You're still in startup mode, right? I mean, it's startup scale up mode, right? You're still,
Yeah.
you know, you have a burn rate and you're kind of pushing through to the next investment round. So just tell us about, you know, how did you, you know, half your hotel, all your hotel, you know, your hotel customers, I guess, suddenly shut their doors
Correct.
in March last year. So how did you respond? What did you need to do?
Yeah, like we scaled up to 450 people at this time within the last year. We'd open up 12 offices in all main locations that you can think of: Paris, Amsterdam, Munich, anywhere that you could think of that's a prime hospitality location. And then March 12th hit. I remember that was my birthday, and you know, Trump made that announcement on television that they were closing the border of the US. I'm like, that cannot happen, and it did. And suddenly the occupancies plummeted. And our business model is we make SaaS revenue, so software as a service revenue, and then we make payments revenue. And the payments revenue is transactional, so it disappeared overnight. Literally went down to 10%. So if half of your revenue disappears overnight, you get on a call on the weekend with your leadership team, and you basically say, guys, this won't work. Like if we're going to be burning through 2-3 million a month, we will be dead in 4 months. That's literally, you know, that was the back of the napkin calculation I made. No science behind it. We're going to be dead in 4 months, and we have to take drastic measures. So we said, we don't want to fundraise when there's a pandemic going on, and probably the economic crisis that will be the fallout of it. So let's assume that for 18 months, we will not be fundraising. And let's work backwards. So let's start at the bottom line, say this is what the burn rate can be to get us to 18 months, and then work upwards. And on paper, it's an easy exercise because you start to you know, cross off functions that you don't need. But the human reality of it was horrific. Like you had to let go of people remotely. We let go of about 220 people in a very short time span. We were like cut deep is what people told us. But if you have, you know, HR departments in 12 countries, it's hard, especially like France and Holland, where you have these bizarre labor contracts and unions that you have to take care of. So it's taking us a very long time to get through that mess. And I think we reached about October last year, when everyone was still in mourning, because we let phenomenal people go into business. But it was also a point where we realized, okay, we've been wrong about one assumption, which is what we made at the beginning, is that we thought that no one was going to buy our products for the next year, that we had to do everything to maintain our current customer base. And that assumption wasn't right, because actually customers were buying. We grew our portfolio in the last year by about 45%, because, you know, if your hotel's empty and you're doing everything remote, well, an on-premise solution doesn't work for you, because you need to dial into a remote server. And actually it opened up the eyes of hoteliers who have been, you know, holding back on innovation. And actually our sales teams were all hitting goals. Like every salesperson hit their goal, got bonuses paid out last year, which is crazy in this time. But it's because suddenly our industry was ready to buy a solution and really innovate and think about how to rewire. So I think in September, October last year, we really said, okay, guys, culturally, I get it. We are upset, but we have to turn this point and look towards the future. And we really made a conscious effort to say, okay, let's look to the future, because actually it's a very bright future. The churn was elevated, but it wasn't even above 10%, which if you think about it, today still, right? So most of the industry is reopening. You think actually a third of our hotels are still completely closed. They have not had any occupants in the last 7 days. And it's going to take a while for all of them to reopen effectively. But for only 5% additional churn to happen because of COVID, it's crazy. Like it just shows you how sticky our product is in the hotel, because we're the last solution to take out. So I think the crisis, it focused us on centralizing the business, building in lots of automation. Actually, customers are buying, and the churn is super low. So we're right now, I'm very optimistic about what the future will look like for Mews.
And that's a great way, perhaps, just to move on to the final question, really, or final set of questions, which is really around the future, right? So you had this huge growth, you had COVID, where you had to kind of cut, you know, halve your business, rewire, automate, reconfigure, you know, replan. And obviously, I know you said, you know, you're now on back on that growth trajectory. You know, you're able to start to hire again. You're able to think about your next financing round. Where would you like to be, like, as a business? You know, if you're looking back in, say, 5 years, what's in your mind? What's your vision, right? Where would you like to get to?
So, like, we've always had big dreams. No one just believed us, and more it comes in focus that actually we can achieve some of these things. Obviously we'd love to be a decacorn in 5 years time, but that will require a lot of hard work. In the hospitality space, we aim to be the preferred supplier for hotels. One of the things that COVID has done is pushed a very different type of workforce, and I think people will be working partly remote. They can travel a lot more, but also work from their space, from their rooms, or from the hotel. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're basically rewiring the system to enable not just sales of bedrooms, but also to sales of, we call it spaces and objects. So it could be a co-working space that a hotel would have, or the ability to turn a bedroom into an office. So we're really making the system much more flexible to cater to different objects and spaces, but also time units, right? So if you want to stay for a month, great, we'll give you a monthly rate instead of a nightly rate. And that's what we're building. So we put all of our product teams on the long-term future of Muse, because we know that that's going to stay. That's one of the remnants of COVID, which I think is a good thing, that flexibility of workforce. And our industry is jumping into it. And I saw a press release yesterday from our core that they are doubling down on having this remote work, and that they're really supporting it, and the ability to have a workspace plus a bedroom space. And I think that's definitely something that's going to stay, and that's something that we're jumping into at the moment. So,
well, it's interesting. I mean, my experience from my days at Cisco, we really moved into remote work 15 years before everybody else, because we were selling the the collaboration technology. Was it actually? It starts to change because, well, Cisco had a lot of offices all around the world. So, but I think there is a stage where, when you start to become less office centric, there becomes another need for, when you do want to meet up, where do you actually meet, right? And do you have to find a hotel to stay in plus a co-working space, or et cetera, et cetera? So I think there will be innovation in this space as people shift their way of working.
And from that point of view, it's very exciting, because suddenly this is like a lot of this dead space that sits in hotels. Like if you think about a hotel bedroom, it only gets used about 50% of the day. The other 50% actually doesn't get usage. So if you can figure out a way to make that more flexible, it's going to be very beneficial to the owners of the hotels, because you make a lot more revenue from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Matt? What about you in terms of your own leadership, right? How are you going to need to shift how you lead, right? How you run the company?
It's something I think about a lot, and it's you in this role, you go from doing everything, like I was doing support and sales and implementations, to managing managers, and suddenly I'm leading a team of people that are actually sometimes even better than I am. And it is scary sometimes to be around that much talent, but they lift you as a CEO up as well, and they push you out to develop. And I'm getting a new coach, so that it's good to refresh your coaching regularly, so that you get a different perspective on the business and a different person to come in to challenge you. And it's I just love learning. Like I get bored if I do the same thing, and I've in 8 years with Muse, not one day been bored in my job. So I'm still on this growth trajectory, but I also realized that possibly in a few years' time, I will have reached my peak, and we may have to bring in someone else. And I think it's good to have that mindset at all times in the back of your mind, that I don't want to be a blocker to the business. And if at some point I feel I become a blocker because I can't grow up fast enough for the business, it's okay. We'll bring in someone else, and that's okay. I hope that it won't come, and I hope if it comes, not to come soon. But that's definitely in the back of my mind.
So you're right. Your team's leveling up, and that's going to have an impact on you. Is there a specific thing that you might need to change in the way that you say lead your team? Do you see?
I think I'm not necessarily always very strategical. I don't like to. I'm very operational. I like to get my hands dirty. I want to know what's going on around the business. But sometimes it's good to step away and actually write a company strategy. And our leadership team at some point last year, they said, okay, this is all well and great, but what is the strategy? And I was so frustrated by it. I was like, fine, I'll write a strategy. And then I sat back and me and Richard, we sat in the garden and we spent hours writing this company strategy. And in hindsight, I'm like, shit, I really should have done that like way sooner. Right. Because suddenly the whole company gets clarity on what the company strategy is. And, now we're a half year away and we're rewiring the strategy, just looking at, does it make sense what we're doing? And I think I need to learn to be more strategic and really take a lot of time to think about the long-term strategy of Muse. And I like to just get into the nitty-gritty of it. And I need to step away from that as I grow.
Yeah. We always do what made us successful last year and not what makes us successful next year. And that's always the tricky thing. Well, hey, Matt, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you so much for sharing some of your journey. It sounds extremely exciting, right? You've had ups and downs, but it sounds like you are also in the right place with the right product at the right time in this sector. So it's been great to hear about what you're doing and just share some of your, the inside story.
Nice. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, perfect. So if anybody wants to find out more about you or about Muse, what's the best way for them to do that?
We are as transparent as an organization you can get. If you go to mews.com, mews.com, we literally publish everything about our company on there.
Perfect. Okay, well, we'll put that into the show notes. And
nice.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been great speaking to you, and I look forward to watching the evolution of the company over the next few years.
Nice. Thank you.
Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.